Such a classic news term, but there's no better way to describe it, so here we go. There are more questions than answers after a deal was announced to host Qatari military personnel in Idaho. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth announced the agreement during a meeting with Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense on Friday. There has been debate about what was or was not said, so let's all just watch the clip to begin the segment.
Today, we're signing a letter of acceptance to build a Qatari Emiri Air Force facility at the Mountain Home Air Base in Idaho. The location will be host a contingent of Qatari F-15s and pilots to enhance our combined training, increase lethality, interoperability. It's just another example of our partnership.
We further welcome today's signing of the letter of acceptance establishing a Qatari Emir Air Force facility and Mountain Home Air Base in Idaho.
The announcement and the way Hegseth himself phrased it caused a notable reaction from across the political spectrum, and that includes allies and supporters of President Trump's administration. At the end of the day on Friday, though, Hegseth wrote on social media that there was an important clarification, saying, quote, "The United States military has a long-standing partnership with Qatar, including today's announced cooperation with the F-15 aircraft. However, to be clear, Qatar will not have their own base in the United States, nor anything like a base. We control the existing base like we do with all partners." Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, was asked about this on Fox News back on Sunday morning.
What is the function of this Qatar facility? People are wondering, is this an air base? What is Qatar going to be developing in Idaho?
Yeah, I saw some reporting about this, Maria. I actually talked to the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, this morning. This is largely a fake story. We continue to have with countries that we work with. We have relationships where, sometimes their pilots work on our bases, sometimes that we train together, sometimes we work together in other ways. The reporting that somehow there is going to be a Qatari base on United States soil, that's just not true. We are continuing to work with a number of our Arab friends to ensure that we are able to enforce this peace, but we're not going to let a foreign country have an actual base on American soil. So there was a bit of misreporting on that, as there often is, as you know, Maria.
Sheesh. Well, still, Idaho leaders have lots of questions about this. In fact, 8 state lawmakers, all Republicans, sent a letter on Sunday to Idaho's congressional delegation in D.C. They say they are deeply concerned by the agreement with Qatar to dedicate an Air Force facility at Mountain Home Air Force Base. Specifically, they write, quote, "The rise of radical Islamic terrorism remains a serious concern for many Americans. This agreement does little to ease those fears," end quote. They also expressed concerns about coordination with Idaho leaders, arguing that there are direct impacts on their constituents, and they are asking for a formal briefing, which includes a list of 12 questions. So the announcement itself on Friday certainly came to a surprise to many people, but maybe this shouldn't have been a surprise. Sources tell me that this concept was on the table during the first Trump administration, and this whole thing didn't happen overnight, obviously. Conversations likely began sometime around the summer of 2017 when the Trump administration approved the sale of $12 billion worth of American F-15 jets. In fact, there's a 338-page draft report into this whole idea in 2021 and a final report on the idea on the project. It was published in March 2022. It's a very long report, one that technically looks at the environmental assessment of the Qatar Air Force partnership based in Idaho, and it says, quote, "No significant impacts to the human or natural environment or surrounding communities." That was the final finding after 500 pages of really details, and the report has a lot of details of the project and the mission, but I want to be very clear. Nobody has confirmed that this is the current plan. In fact, the federal furloughs seem to be impacting access to that specific information. So we can talk about what was studied for years and the findings, but there is a good chance that some things have changed since the 2022 report into the concept. And information is tricky on this one so far, but there are some nuggets to give a general idea here. First, the plan would permanently station 12 Qatar-owned F-15 QA aircrafts and about 300 additional personnel at the southern Idaho base beginning in fiscal year 2024, this final report said, and that would be with the possibility of extending the operations beyond the initial 10-year period, clearly it didn't happen on that timeline or a year past that, but the Air Force described the proposal as part of a long-standing U.S. policy to provide training to foreign military forces from allied nations, which they say is a practice dating back to World War II. And Qatar's government, they specifically asked that its F-15 squadron be co-located with an existing U.S. Air Force and that they have access to airspace with terrain similar to the Middle East, and they want to use a facility that can minimize cost and construction demands. Idaho's Mountain Home Air Force Base won the bid. Others were considered, including Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. And a key fact here, as you can read, under this plan, Qatar's 12 F-15 QA jets, they would be permanently based at Mountain Home and operated as a separate but integrated squadron under the 366 Fighter Wing Command's operational control. So long story short, yes, controlled by America's Air Force. And the report outlines both temporary and permanent infrastructure that would be needed for this. Interim arrangements covering the first 5 years rely on existing facilities for maintenance and housing. And then longer-term projects include new flight line hangars, squadron operation buildings, maintenance areas, simulator facilities, parking, and a Qatari Air Force Community Center. Again, all this is subject to change. And one may wonder, though, if this is a situation where Qatar agreed to a location and a partnership site and something they had never seen before. Maybe they couldn't find it on a map. Well, it turns out that's not the case. March 14th, 2023, Mountain Home Air Force Base hosted a contingent from Qatar, including top Qatari military leaders. A U.S. Air Force photo gallery has the story of the day, and Chief of Staff of the Qatar Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Jassim El Mani, he toured the base in Mountain Home and met key players. And captions on the 2023 photos read, quote, "A final decision has not been made on the operation with Qatar at Mountain Home Air Force Base, but potential benefits include increased interoperability and enhanced regional security cooperation activities." So, only time will tell what happens next, but there appears to be major work into a blueprint for a partnership with Qatar, based right here in the state of Idaho.